Hey everybody, what's going on? I'm DJ Sixsmith. You're watching The Sit Down. Got a brand new book to talk about. Liz Plank's here to talk about it. For the Love of Men.
There
Certainly
it is.
A catchy headline, and it's a great one so far. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. How are you? Thanks
I'm
for
good.
having me.
First of all, show off the shirt.
Yes.
Let boys cry.
Yes, designed this shirt.
Oh, this is your own shirt.
It is, yes. So my friend Ron did the actual design, but I wanted to create a shirt. I wanted to wear my message, and so I actually created this shirt before the book came out.
Cool.
I don't want to make boys cry. I want to let boys cry. Some people get it.
Let them have the runway to cry.
Yes. Don't cry if you don't want to. Cry if you want to. That's it. That's the message.
But
yeah, some people, but even that is seen a little bit as controversial.
Sure.
Like I've had people respond to it negatively, and I think that's interesting, right?
Yeah, it says a lot about the person.
Exactly, and about the conversation, right? Around
Absolutely.
masculinity, that it's viewed as an attack to just let men be different from the way that we have always let them be.
And that's okay to be a little bit different.
Yeah.
So what piqued your interest in all this? Because I know you did your master's overseas in gender studies.
Yeah.
So how did you get into this whole thing, and what's the journey been like?
Yeah, so it's been a really interesting personal journey and also a professional one. I started writing this book because I realized that these, amazing rooms that I was in, filled with women, to talk about gender equality, whether it was in academic settings or when I moved to New York and I worked in women's media, they were great. We were having amazing conversations. We were coming up with amazing solutions, but half of us were not to be seen. And so I started wondering, where are the men, and how can we bring them into this conversation? Yeah. Because a lot of these problems are actually, not necessarily caused by women, and if we could have everyone in the room, it'd be much more productive. And then I started talking to men, and as a reporter, you go out on a reporting journey, and the stories that I heard were very different from what I expected, right? So often when we have a conversation around masculinity, and just a conversation about men, right? Yeah. When we're like, men need to do this, right? Men need to do this differently. For who? For women, right? Women, you're hurting us in all these different ways. We need you to be different for us. And I think that that's a valid conversation to have. Everyone should have that conversation if they want to. I started realizing that we were assuming that men were bad instead of assuming that men were good. We were assuming that masculinity was inherently a problem instead of assuming that masculinity could be the solution. And that a lot of men who were hurting women, or a lot of men who were doing, participating in these stereotypical male behaviors that are, not helpful for our society, a lot of the men didn't want to participate in those behaviors, right? Or they had participated in them because they'd been hurt by that system. That system is a system in which they were raised and in which they didn't necessarily feel super excited about. And I started really following men's pain, which is what came up in every interview that I had with men, is that they were not happy and go lucky and enjoying all this male privilege, or they were, but there was a lot of pain. And so I realized we're on different sides of a fight, when in fact we could all be on the same side. It'd be a much better party to attend, and we could come with better solutions. And
just doing the work together is really such an important thing.
100%.
Yeah, we need to.
Yes, and there's this, we live in a super individualist society, right? We live in this postmodern society where, if you get something, that means something is taken away from me. And that if we talk about you, that means we're not talking about me. When it's like, I would love for us to talk about men. I would love for men to talk about masculinity. And in a way, for men to talk about their masculinity, have a curiosity about it, is the best thing that you can do for me. And,
Absolutely.
And because we truly are all connected. We're all, everyone who's a woman knows a man. Every man who's a man knows a woman, has come out of a woman, right? We're all part of this ecosystem together, and we have to stop believing in the idea that we're on separate teams.
No, we're definitely not.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting because a lot of men that I know, me in particular, spend a ton of time on career and thinking critically about how to advance in your career, but never really investing in the time in yourself. So like you said, like unpacking pain from the past, that's not something that's really high on the priority list.
No.
So what was it like talking to these men about their pain, and how fascinating was it to hear them go into great length about it when you didn't feel like you had that in your life at all before?
Yeah, I think what you just said is so important, right? That we value men for the work that they do, primarily, right? So if you talk about men, about what it means to be a man, very often work will be the first thing that comes up. Success, provider, right? That you're the breadwinner or a breadwinner. And so there's that focus on that, and that's how men feel useful, right? It's not just, I think sometimes we dismiss men who are holding on to being a breadwinner, or men who feel threatened if they're not the main provider in their family. And I think that we need to examine that, and it comes out in a lot of negative behaviors. So men who make less money than their wives cheat more on their wives, right? There are like things that if we don't have this conversation, it can come out in negative behaviors that are not okay. But I think that we need to give value and listen and hear that discomfort and that pain of not being able to meet society's expectations, right? And talk about how that ideal that you've been taught from previous generations of men, and also that pressure that you probably have from the women in your lives too, to be this provider, that's a lot for you to shoulder. And actually, the people in your life, would benefit much more if you were comfortable with who you are in the world, separate from all those things. Right. It's not just, again, individualistic, it's very capitalistic, right? That your value in the world has a number, right? Has a dollar sign next to it, and if you are not able to do that, then you don't exist, or you don't matter, or you're not, you're a burden to other people, right, which is intrinsically connected to our suicide epidemic, which is primarily, it affects everyone. Women are more likely to try and kill themselves. Men are more likely to succeed when they kill themselves. And the problem of gun violence in this country is we often have conversations around mass shootings, which obviously are a problem. The vast majority of gun deaths, though, are men killing themselves. It's suicide. It's 2/3 are death by suicide, and 80% of those deaths are men. And so, if you feel like you are a burden to other people, if you feel like you can't ask for help, right, all of these characteristics and this perfect petri dish, really, for a suicide epidemic is how we raise men in this country. And so we need to have empathy for what that's like, and have a curiosity and a mainstream conversation about how we shift, and rethink masculinity. What does it mean in 2019? And how different is it from, your dad and your dad's dad? We've had these conversations when it comes to women, and it hurts me to see that conversation not happening for men.
Yeah, and it's not an attack on masculinity. It's just something that needs to transition and transform based on the times.
Exactly.
Because when I think about my grandpa's generation, it was a much different time. Things weren't being spoken about, even from my dad's generation, growing up in the 70s and the 80s. To now, it's like, I think the most fascinating thing is trying to bridge that gap between grandpa, dad, and who you are now. So how do you think people can go about doing that, just in terms of starting those conversations and being like, hey, something like this happened in my childhood, and this still hurts me. How do we begin those conversations?
I mean, those are hard conversations to have, and I always encourage people to start with questions rather than statements, right? And to actually listen to the answer.
That's a big one.
Like, actually, we often come into these conversations putting our ego over the objective, which is, being able to come to an agreement, being able to mend this relationship, being able to connect, being able to evolve. If you're stuck in ego, you're just going to want to be right. And when someone comes into a conversation and starts with, this is why you're wrong, you stop hearing them, and you're just thinking about what you're going to say so that you can prove to them that they're wrong.
Right, you're just seeing red,
yeah. And it's again, people can have those conversations if they want. We, can turn on cable news and see that all day, every day. I don't feel particularly well when I am consuming, and when I'm sort of consuming those kinds of conversations, whether it's in the media or having them in my own life. So I just encourage people to actually start from a place of wanting to understand and understanding the motivation, right? So if a man is for example, feels stressed out about the fact that his wife is making more money than him, if he's straight and in that kind of partnership. Sure. I think the initial reaction for a lot of people would be like, get over yourself. Like, oh my God, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Yeah. More money? What's the problem? It doesn't matter who makes it. I think another way of approaching it is like, well, why is that difficult for you? And not coming like, why is that difficult? But actually again, wanting to know why and being open to the answer. And the more you go into asking questions and connecting and making a safe space for that person to actually share how they're feeling, I think the more you're going to probably get to the root of the pain, which is not a hatred for women, which is not a hatred for money, right? It's a tension, right? With, well, then who am I if I'm not the breadwinner?
Right.
How, you know, what value do I add to her life? So it's you know, expressing itself in a way that's could be negative, but the root of trying to understand the root of that pain is how you can actually change. But shaming men for being that way, no one changes through shame.
Yeah, no, it's not going to happen that way.
Never. They actually only get more stuck in.
Right, they're just going to dig down further.
Yeah, because they're like, well, they don't like me already, so why would I do anything differently? So that's what I'm seeing a lot of. I'm seeing and hearing from a lot of people, I think not just men, but you know, the people who I want, you know, to be part of our movement and join this movement and be part of this conversation is mostly men, but a lot of men are turned off by a lot of the conversations that we're having around gender. And I think that I catch myself, like, and I participated in it because I was angry. I was mad, I was hurt, I was in pain. So you know, it's easier to
shut that door.
To shut that door and to express pain. It's easier to cause pain than to recognize your pain,
totally.
right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, yeah, it is a conversation about everyone's pain. Which, like, it can seem negative, but that's how you actually grow.
It's part of life.
Yeah.
We're all going to deal with pain.
Yes.
And we're a very judgmental society also.
Are.
And when that happens, it's very easy to go to our corners.
Yes.
And you mentioned some guys here in the book that clearly aren't ready to step up to the plate and have that conversation.
Yeah.
So what have been some of the main pushbacks you've received with this book, or just in your conversations with men throughout the time you did this?
Well, I always get pushback from women who are angry that they perceive this book as me saying that it's women's emotional labor. It's up to women to fix men. That's not what I'm saying. I don't know where they can assemble
where that
words
interpretation is.
And mash up some of the things I've said, but I've never said that. I don't believe that. I did the emotional, it's like the tagline for the book is like, I did it so that you don't have to. Like, I spoke to men, I did the reporting. So you can just, give them this book, they can Venmo you, or they can just buy it on their own, and they can do that work, right? That to me, that's the best way for men to be allies to the women in their lives, is to do that work.
And just to have the communication.
To have the communication.
That's such a big part of all this.
Yes, and being open, again, to the answer, right? Yeah. It's that, you know, there's so much also that women have had a lot of pain, right? And so they've created these barriers. They've created these coping mechanisms too, and they understand men's behavior in one way. Again, I'm frustrated. I'm feeling, emasculated by this. I mean, it's easy to be like, you're such a baby.
Right.
Get over yourself. You're doing this because you're sexist. And I did that. I judged that. And it's been interesting for me as a woman, to go on a chivalry diet, to be like, I'm not going to expect men to pay anymore, because how can I tell them, stop feeling like that's your main role, when I am expecting you to do that and to participate in that way. And so inadvertently, I'm sending you the message, and I'm reinforcing that model of masculinity that I think you need to rethink. And so I have women react that way. I have obviously, and I have women reacting, in the way that a lot of unfortunately men react, which is, why am I telling men how to be men? Again, not interested in that.
Just trying to have a conversation about it.
I actually would love for you to do that with yourself, so I can go back to my life.
Totally.
I'm interested in men creating support groups for each other. I'm interested in men building community, being vulnerable with each other, and supporting each other, so that there's not that emotional burden on women to bear. But I think a lot of men perceive this as me, telling them the masculinity is the problem, that they need to change, and that they need to do things that women want. And I'm like, no, do it for you. Yeah. That's what the book is about. The book is about, really highlighting all of the ways that, there's a chapter called "If the Patriarchy is So Great, Why Is It Making You Die?" All of the ways that the patriarchy is actually shortening the lives of men. Yeah. It's shortening the lives of women, for sure. And there's tons of books about that, but it's also making men's lives more difficult. Some men's life, right? It's a patriarchy. The patriarchy is like a pyramid scheme. Some men do benefit, but a lot of men don't. And so that's what I'm interested in. Men, having conversations around that. And I don't need to be in the room. I don't want to be in the room. I'm so cool.
Those are for men to have those conversations.
Have them.
And to be free in doing so.
Yeah, women do that, and I think it makes I mean, yeah, just why is only one gender sort of, allowed to have support groups that are and create spaces that are safe for that. And I understand that the reason is that there's a history of discrimination against women, of gentlemen clubs, right? But I want spaces for men that are positive, right? Spaces for men where men can be vulnerable with each other, as opposed to spaces where they discriminate against women or discriminate against people of color or discriminate against, I think, themselves based on certain rules about masculinity that are outdated.
Yeah, totally. So one of the most important points of your book, it's like the first 20 pages, it's like women are thinking like all the different things that are wrong with them.
Yes.
And then you're asking the question of men, like what's so bad about being a man? And I really thought critically about that. I'm like, I'm white and I'm a man, and there's a lot of privilege that comes with that. And I talked about it with my wife, and I was like, you've listed so many different things to me, and there's nothing that's going to come up for me. And you had those same conversations with other people. So what was most profound in those chats?
Well, what's hard? What do you think is hard about being a man? When you think about some of the like growing up as a boy, what was something that was difficult?
I mean, honestly, there really weren't things that I look back on that I was like, this was really hard. I never was put in a category where I was cast away. I mean, there was like, honestly, now it's just like, I have to shave my head every day because I lost my hair. Like, that's like the only thing.
Well, that's something, right? That like, and were you ever called like the P word, the F word? Were you called weak? Were you called? But you didn't think there's something wrong with me when those things were said to you.
No, it just it seemed as though that was just something I had to deal with.
Interesting.
Because some people definitely internalize that and will look like there's definitely something wrong with me. But I never internalized that. I mean, there were certainly things like I was called fat as a kid, I was called those words as a kid, but I think I was confident in who I was at that point. And then later on, I think ego was a problem, and then I kind of had to look under the hood to be like, I got to change some things. So there was probably some ignorance along the way. And then looking back, now I can honestly say like, yeah, there were some things I would do differently. I would treat some people differently, you know, because you're trying to be liked by other men. And you're trying to be popular with other guys, and there's a lot of shaming as well. So now I can say,
other men, right?
Absolutely, yes. But for me, when I look at it big picture, I can say, there's not a ton that's holding me back. Whereas for my wife, being physically a woman, so many different things every single day, looking through a gendered lens. Whereas I start to really critically think about things, that's when I realized like, wow, this is really messed up. But it took me a long time to get to that point of awareness. Whereas some guys are just like, head in the clouds, don't even realize it, and that's why it's so hard to break through, which I'm sure you've dealt with too.
And I think that's the, when I talk to, it's interesting, a lot of, every guy's been called, I mean, fag and pussy and all those things, right? And that's, rooted in that if you show any sign of weakness, quote unquote, you're a woman, therefore you cannot be a man, right? That you constantly need to prove that you're a man to the men around you. And to women to a certain extent. But there are a lot of men who, when I have this conversation with them, similar to you, and I feel like these are the men who actually read the book, which is really interesting, is the men who are not affected by, or who were able to cope with that and not internalize that culture. So I think the equivalent for women is women who don't feel the need to be thin, or don't feel the need to
just say, screw it, I'm not going to adapt this.
And someone told them they were fat, or this guy said, I don't want to date you because you have to lose weight, and they were like, there's something wrong with you. I, on the other hand, did not, I wish I was that person and did not take on all of these things, but I thought there was something wrong with me. I was trying to fix my body, fix myself, fit into this box of what it means to be a girl or a woman in our society. And being free from that, although I'm still working on it, is one of the most beautiful, freeing things I've ever done.
Liberating,
It's so liberating, and that's what I want for guys. And that's why, again, I always say this conversation is about freedom, ultimately, because I think that, again, people don't like to be told that they're not free. People don't like to be told you're doing things not because you want to, but you don't have willpower, which is not true, but we are social creatures. We're emotional creatures. I come from a behavioral science background too, which is, you learn that 97% of our behavior is not intent. 3% of it is conscious. Like, I know that I'm picking up this thing and talking to you in this way. And I think that everything that I do is rational and that I'm a rational being, but we're not.
No,
we're a species that is rooted, we have a reptilian brain, right, that like actually is in control of most of what we do throughout the day. And so, being aware of that can be difficult for some people who like to believe that, they're in control of everything. But I and this is why it's a hard conversation, but that's why it's an important conversation, so that you're actually in control, right? So let boys cry doesn't mean men crying everywhere, all over the place, all the time. It means, and you know, not having control over their emotions. It's having control over your emotions so that they don't control you, so that you control them.
And to actually feel it.
Yes, or else it's control. If you don't feel it, it's controlling you.
Totally.
If you're not aware of it, it's in control, not you. And that's the difference, I think, in, you know, even in the way that we talk about therapy, and even in the way that we talk about emotions. I think that sometimes it's something that women, it's a language that women are comfortable with, but we need to make it, we need to create, I think, a curriculum. Like, we need to create a kind of therapy, a kind of community and support group that speaks to men.